Thank you, Mark. And thank you very much to our three panelists for their insightful inputs today. We now have a few questions from our attendee. The first question is from Mr. Tissa Wickramasinghe. His question is, what would be the impact on shipping lines that opted for scrubbers with the introduction of VLSFO and the current bunker prices?
Right. Okay, maybe I can start on this. I talk a little bit about it when I mentioned the innovations and this and the climate change. I think that there will be an increased focus on the policies and the governance related to climate change. Therefore, the use of scrubbers on ships will be more and more of a focus. At the moment, there's maybe maybe a lack of policy around it, of checking whether the ships will what do they have and how do they emit. But I think that will become more important in the future. And ships that shipping lines that have decided to make use of scrubbers, of purchase, make the investment, I think that will be positive in the future. Bunker prices, yeah, I mean the oil price, I see there will be a decrease in demand, so bunker prices are likely to decrease. That will make it more attractive to then maybe not have the scrubbers and continue to use diesel oil, but I think it will be related to the policy, which I think will become more and more stringent in countries.
Thank you, Nishal.
Let me also just
address.
Yeah, let me also just address that, Ajay. Tisa, thanks for that question. I think with regards to scrubbers and environmental impact, one needs to think about this in the long term. The cost of fitting a scrubber varies roughly between 5 million to about 8-9 million, depending on the size of the ship. Originally, when we looked at this, the price differential that was projected between the very low sulfur oil and the heavy fuel oil, it made perfect sense to invest in scrubbers, and the payback period was roughly, I think, off the top of my head, about a year. The question therefore is that if the average life of the ship is about 20-25 years, to what extent do we think that the current situation or status quo would continue with regards to an oversupply of in the oil markets, which would impact the pricing. And if we take the view that this is more likely to be short term, because this is likely to bleed a lot of the oil producing countries, and therefore prices would go up at some point of time, and this differential between very low sulfur oil and heavy fuel oil reestablishes, at that point of time, bunkers would again start to make perfect sense. So think about this the long term rather than the current pricing. And also the second point is think about how the current status quo and therefore the price differential between heavy fuel oil and very low sulfur oil would continue. I hope that answers.
Thank you, Dinesh. We have a few more questions, and another question is from Mr. Martin Manion, and his question is: do you expect significant business distress due to cash flow impacts and market future uncertainty, leading to increased business failures and acquisitions in particular sectors? Note Saudi investment in Carnival, for example, in the cruise sector.
Martin, I'll club your question with a similar question that Mark has also asked. What about business failures and mergers?
Yes.
I would say, Martin, I'll address your questions in I'll divide it into bite size. So clearly there's going to be an impact on on businesses with regards to cash flow and therefore financial stress. The point on do we expect it to be significant? Well, it depends on how long this virus continues and therefore continues to impact businesses. That is uncertain. So there's some amount of uncertainty with regards to significance, but it's certainly going to have an impact. Is this likely to reach, is this likely to, sorry, let me just, your question suddenly disappeared from in front of me. Yeah, there it is. Is it likely to result in business failures and acquisitions? This depends on the sector that we are looking at. In some of the market sectors, which are highly concentrated, cruise, for example, is quite significantly a concentrated sector. The other sector where there's a fair amount of concentration is the container lines, albeit there are still some smaller carriers. The extent to which they would be business failures or potential acquisitions, let me address failures first. I think failures are a result of breakdown of negotiations between businesses and lenders. I think a lot of the businesses are going to have a number of options that they can look at. This is already happening in the container sector, as we can see. If they have run out of those options, I think banks will still be willing. This is not an isolated incident where a particular company is performing badly, and therefore the bank has the option to withdraw that money or result in the failure of a business and invest that money elsewhere. This is a global phenomena, and any other business is likely to be in a similar situation. So it doesn't make sense, from my view, for the banks to break down negotiations or for management to break down negotiations. This is impacting everyone in a similar way. With regards to acquisitions, coming back to that again, do I think this is an opportune time to take over another business when there's this amount of uncertainty and to add leverage to your own business, especially given the cash flow situation? I don't think this is the most opportune time. If things start to look up and if things start to improve, obviously those companies that are potential targets for acquisitions and have cash flow issues, their situation improves as well. But no, having said that, no doubt there would be certain candidates which would be under extreme pressure. The question is, do they have other options? Have they exhausted their options? Do they have good banks behind them, good management behind them to enable continued discussions with the banks and to look at various options? I think that is where the answer lies with regards to what potential failures would we see or potential M&A activity that we would see going forward. So these are just my own thoughts.
Thank you, Dinesh. Yeah, maybe I think Dinesh has answered this very well. I'll just add like maybe one or two very small short comment. So I speak quite a lot to investors, infrastructure funds, and private equities, and the feedback that I get is that there's a lot of money available to invest, and they're waiting to invest for it. But in the short term, the next sort of 2-3 months, everyone is really in a wait and see to see what's going to happen. But I think the message is that there is investment there and people are waiting for the opportunities, and there will be opportunities. There are some sectors that will suffer more than others. Like I said, I think in cruise in particularly, in my opinion, and others that have more opportunities like the LNG, for example. But yeah, I think that there are some very positive notes. Maybe if we look in a year time or so. And then the second point is, so Dinesh touched on it as well. It depends on how long this virus remains with us. And to some extent, I'm going to just gather the next question as well from Steve Cameron, which is talking about the secondary wave. it's if there's a secondary wave, then obviously things will be more pessimistic than what we're talking now. But you could have another decrease, overall decrease next year if there's a second and maybe even third wave. So it really depends. At the moment, I think no one really knows. But the longer this gets, and the more companies will be at risk of getting distressed, and that's not just cruise and other.
Any comments, Mark?
No, I think well said. I mean, I think like some of you in the audience, you're probably eyeing out to buy some shares, right? In a downturn. So I've been watching the cruise sector, I've been watching the airline sector, I've been watching, I bought some petroleum stocks to share with you. Not that you should follow me, but I'm like, well, when will it, drop? It's very uncertain. For the first time ever, I'm scared. I'm saving cash. Because I never know 6 months down the road whether I still have a job, right? So it's very uncertain time. So let's not scare each other out. But it is a quite uncertain time. So I would say every company is tightening their belts. I think, was it you, Dinesh, that mentioned that is it the right time for acquisition? I don't think so. Everybody's just looking after their own backyard for now. Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen. We have time for one more question. This is from Mr. Mark Asaf. Should we promote deglobalization and change GVCs to avoid future shocks?
I personally don't want to live in a world where we are nationalistic, or I think everybody benefits with globalization. That's my view, and certainly the world when we have just look after our own backyard is not an interesting world, and the rich poor gap will widen. So countries like China will be fine, I would say. They have a large enough population, and Indonesia could probably be fine if that's deglobalization. But a lot of smaller countries, even Singapore, very much depends on globalization. Absolutely.
Okay. Anything to add on, Dinesh and Nishal, on that particular question?
I think I very much agree. I think globalization is here to stay. It has much more positive than negatives. There will be some change, like I discussed a little bit in my presentation on how people do things. But I think in terms of globalization, so the world is so much integrated. The supply chain is so integrated between countries, like Mark discussed before. It's very, very difficult to extricate yourself from this, and it's not really in anyone's benefit in the long term.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll broadly agree with Mark and Nishal. The only thing I would add, I think rather than looking at this from a globalization, deglobalization angle, to take your point about future shocks, clearly one needs to diversify the risks, and therefore a lot of the importers already thinking about this, and therefore looking at other South Asian nations. But the entire point about globalization is that one really needs to be very competitive to supply the rest of the world, not just competing with other countries, but competing with technology in itself. I think, Mark, you touched upon very briefly about the garments industry, and therefore that, was it you, Mark, or was it Nishal? And therefore technology resulting in a lot of nearshoring or onshoring with regards to some of the basic industries. So I think one needs to think about, from a globalization perspective, one needs to think about how competitive we are and we continue to remain, whether we are competing with other countries or we are competing with technology in itself.
Okay.
I agree. A lot of nearshoring taking place. Yeah.
Okay, we have got time for maybe one or two more questions. the other question I'd like to point out is from Mr. Shailesh Garg. How easy would be reshoring considering that it takes time to build the required capacity and it will also have cost implications?
Sorry, reshoring, you mean?
Reshoring. How easy would how easy would be reshoring considering that it takes time to build the required capacity and it will also have cost implications?
Oh, I think it depends on what segment of the industry you're in. If you take for US, for instance, right? They want to make clothes for their own garments. How competitive can they be? Minimum wage? No way. I mean, an example, somebody working in Perth, I know a friend of mine, his niece works as a checking countess in Perth airport. She earns more a day than a week in McDonald's for somebody in Indonesia, in Jakarta. So you can see that disparity, the gap. So some industries is almost impossible for pure from the cost point of view. And the other one, the skill sets. Even nearer I'm in Hong Kong, Rory, RJU in Kuala Lumpur. You look around, a lot of Malaysians don't want to do low-skilled jobs now. Yeah, they want to move up. So that's in Singapore. So they don't want to do that. So that's how the world. That's why I like about globalization. Everybody has a chance, and I would say from practical point of view, it's quite difficult for, let's say, even from UK, if they lose the car automotive manufacturing because of Brexit, very difficult because they'll lose the supply chain components as well. Once you lose that, extremely difficult to upskill in the next 10, 15 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. And if you look at more complex products, like to build a plane, Airbus, the wings is built somewhere in France, and some components are built in the UK or in Germany. And to build one component, it will probably cross borders more than 2 or 3 times. So it's very, very difficult to change this structure. And I think like Mark said, it's either for very complex items, it's extremely integrated, and for very simple one, like a t-shirt, you just need to compete on cost and skill, and most countries will not be able to do that. So I don't believe that that can be possible.
Thank you for agreeing with me.
Thank you.
Very
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have to wrap up the session today. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our distinguished panelists, Dinesh, Nishal, and Mark, for preparing their materials and joining us today in this webinar. Thank you very much, distinguished panelists. Thank you to all our viewers for your attendance. I hope it has been helpful and insightful. Please join us next week on Thursday, the 23rd of April at 5 p.m. Hong Kong, where the topic which we'll be covering is on maintaining port technology and servicing port equipment during COVID-19. This is a must-attend webinar for anyone involved in container ports, equipment, and technology. Please may I ask you to follow us at Transport Events on LinkedIn, and please visit our website www.transportevents.com for information on our future events. Please feel free to contact me at ajay@transportevents.com. That's AJAY@transportevents.com if you need any further assistance. Thank you very much. And also, before I forget, I understand that many of you have requested for the presentation slide from our speakers, and I think we will actually publish it very soon with regards to this webinar and also the video, and you will get information within the next couple of days. Thank you very much.